Francois started working with his father Louis in 1988, and it was during this time that he learnt his craft. Francois' father retired in 2010, and the Domaine Louis Carillon estate, the Domaine, was then split between the two sons, so Jack and Francois, with each brother claiming rights to certain vineyards and allowing them to make and sell wines bearing their own name. So 2017 is the Domaine Francois Carillon's 8th vintage. So firstly, on opening the bottle, I noticed that the cork was a little bit different, you might have noticed. So this is a synthetic cork used by some of Burgundy's top producers. They are used to attain the integrity of the wine and to protect its organoleptic quality. So basically its freshness. So Francois is committed to quality, and he wants his wines to arrive to you as best as he intended. So even though this is a generic white Burgundy, meaning that grapes can be sourced from anywhere up to 400 villages in and around Burgundy, the grapes for this particular wine come from two mostly clay-based plots in the village of Polini and one from the village of Merceau, totaling 5 hectares, which is about just over 10 acres. And one of the thrills of tasting fine wine, certainly for me, is being able to pinpoint exactly on a map where you're tasting a wine from, which is its specific terroir. So I think for £25, which is incredible value, it's amazing that it has that credential. The vines used for this wine are from 35 to 60-year-old vines, which means the grapes are now producing optimum juice for concentration and complexity. So it's really now bearing some good fruit. So let's taste. It's got a lovely nose, lifted, sort of citrus, lemons. It's very bright. On the palate, it's sort of some fleshy pear, stone fruit. It's got some really nice minerality, which I think is being picked up from the soil. It's got a lovely seam of acidity that keeps you gulping and wanting to go back for more. So I think it's really nice. Francois uses a judicious amount of new oak, so roughly 10%, which gives it that lovely mouthfeel you're tasting. So it's not just straight, harsh acidity. It's got lovely fruit. It's got lovely roundness, which I think is perfect. It's chilled to about 10 degrees. I've only just taken this out of the fridge, so perfect at the moment. Certainly today when it's hot, great with seafood dishes, light meats, white meats in particular. A little side note on the 2017 vintage. It was regarded as a very good vintage for both whites and reds, much to the delight of the vignerons. It was one of the first vintages in a while that's produced a very generous crop. So there has been shortages over the last few years prior to 2017. But with 2017, they managed to pull in a fair amount of yield, which was fantastic news for them, and it sort of filled up the rafters in the cellars again. A little bit about the vintage itself. There were freezing temperatures on the nights of the 27th and 29th of April, which was cause for concern, particular frost damage. But what the vignerons are now starting to do in the Côte de Beaune, and the Côte de Nuits as well, and also you're starting to see it in Bordeaux, they've started to set light to hay bales and also large candles in the vineyards. And this is to detract and to avoid any frost damage. Sadly, it's now an all too common sight, but it's reassuring that they can actually do something about any potential damage that they foresee on the weather. So I'll pass you over to Guy now to talk you through the Larage 2014.
This is from Castillon. So Castillon is on the right bank of Bordeaux. It's about a 10-minute drive due roughly east from Saint-Emilion. And it's one of the historic, long-standing wine-producing areas of the right bank of Bordeaux. Not as famous, granted, as Saint-Emilion itself and as Pomerol, for example. this is a long-standing source of fantastic quality and also fantastic value wine. This is £32.95 ink VAT on the C&B list, which, okay, granted is not cheap, but in terms of money and what else you see from this region, I think it delivers incredibly well. The property, Domaine de l'Orage, as it was originally called, then rechristened just l'Orage for simplicity, is owned by Caroline and Louis Mitcheville, Louis known to most as Lulu. They bought the property in 2007. 2007 was also the first vintage. Although there were vines on the estate when they purchased it, they were fairly young vines in 2007. And it's testament to what they've achieved in a short, relatively short amount of time, but the 2007 is still drinking beautifully. If you can find any of it, it's still an amazing wine. The vines nowadays are pushing 20 years old. So we're talking about an estate which is just embarking on its sort of third decade of life. It's probably worth saying a few words about the Mitcheville approach and the Mitcheville family, because l'Orage is one of 3 wines which we release annually as what we call the Mitcheville stable of wines. So this is Louis' wine, as I've said, and Caroline's. The other 2 wines in the Mitcheville trio are Tertre Robeuf from Saint-Emilion, and also Roc de Combe from further north in the Côte de Bourg, so significantly further up the Gironde estuary. Both of those wines are made by Louis' father, Francois Mitcheville. Francois took over from his father at Tertre Robeuf in 1978. Since then, he has, without overstating it, turned the wine into a real legend in Saint-Emilion. Tertre Robeuf is one of the wines in many vintages from Saint-Emilion. Now, what makes this kind of family of wines special or different is partly due to what they do in the vineyard. Viticulture. The metric, I guess you could say, for Francois and Louis is the fruit of the tannin. Now, so many times in Bordeaux, you see winemakers making wine with regard first and foremost to the quality of the tannins, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this approach is slightly different. It focuses on the fruit. It's arguably a slightly more Burgundian way of making wine. The extraction is very, very soft. But what they do is effectively leave the grapes on the vine for longer than their neighbors, in very simple terms. So what you're seeing in a vintage like 2014, 14 was a little bit atypical in the sense that they had quite a cool, slightly wet summer, and then they had a beautiful autumn. So the autumn was very fine, and they wanted to hang on to harness as much of that benevolence as they could. And so they actually ended up picking the 2014 well into the back end of October, which in today's terms, you know, looking at the 2020 vintage now, and the vigneron in some parts of France are actually gearing up for a harvest at the end of this month, of August. So, you know, picking at the end of October is really quite late. The flip side of that is that as the grapes stay on the vine for longer and longer, levels coming down. But this trick that Francois and Louis have managed, and I'm not entirely sure I quite understand how they've done it, is to retain this real incredible sense of nervy minerality and freshness in the wines, which almost doesn't really stack up on paper. So in a sense, these wines are a paradox because they have this sense of supreme freshness. Whereas if you were to look at what they do in the vineyard, it sort of, in some senses, goes against the grain. So that makes them fascinating. And as a family approach, that's one of the many things that make them stand out. In terms of grape varieties here, we're talking 80% Merlot and 20% Cabernet Franc. The proportion of Cabernet Franc at l'Orage is decreasing. I think in this, if you've got it in front of you, do have a taste. There's a slight leafiness to it, which I think does speak of the Cabernet Franc 20% that's in there. But essentially, we are looking at an expression of Merlot from Castillon. So that's really what this wine is all about. There's no second wine at L'Orage. There's no second wine at any of the Micheville properties. Again, makes them stand out. And I think if you, again, have a taste, what really comes through for me is a sense of what Francois Micheville calls degraded fruit. That may sound like a strange concept, but it's as you leave the fruit to go ripe and then almost find its second expression of ripeness, the color begins to come down a little bit. So the anthocyanins are slightly decreasing by the time it's picked, which gives it, if you look in the glass, a slightly bricked red ruby color, which, okay, is to do a little bit with the age. I mean, this is a wine which is 6 years old now, but as well as that, it's to do with the state of maturity at which it was picked. But, you know, this is something that they're totally comfortable with. They're comfortable with wines being a little bit paler, a little bit more brick in color. And it gives this sense of ultra ripeness and sort of a rich expression to the fruit. The oak is totally integrated. It's 100% new oak, as all of the Micheville properties are, but it's beautifully integrated. So I think this is a supreme example, really, of winemaking in a fairly different style from the right bank of Bordeaux, from an enclave which is slightly overlooked, which is slightly different. And, you know, it's great value for money at under £33 a bottle. This is 13.5% alcohol, which in today's terms is pretty good. I mean, that's pretty low. And I looked back at what Louis had said about this wine when we first released it, and I was struck that two of the words he used to describe it were fleshy and invigorating. Those were his two sort of catchwords for the vintage, and I think that's spot on. It's got a wonderful freshness, which will see it through. It's drinking now, but it will quite happily continue to drink for 5, 6, 7 years to come.
Yeah, it's lovely. I actually opened it last night, so this is the second day, but it's retained its freshness, its vigor. It has that lovely sort of forest floor note to it, which I absolutely love. It's got that sort of, as the guy said, referred to, that degraded fruit note. It has that nice sweet spot as well. Beyond that, from the Merlot, it's lovely. I'd like to see how it would age over the next couple of years or so, but it is drinking fantastically well at the moment. And for the price, I think it offers a great deal of complexity.
What these two wines have in common is that they're two fairly classical expressions of Chardonnay and Merlot, respectively. You know, I know we've done some tastings which have pushed the boundaries in terms of the types of wines we're looking at. You know, here we're actually a couple of real classics. You know, a white Burgundy made from Pouligny and a right bank red Bordeaux. But I think they both have a stamp of their place and a real interest around them, even within that kind of traditional framework.
About Louis and the family history, and what is his future, and what is he still like looking at respecting the tradition of the family, or is it looking to do something a bit different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, he's very much in tune with what his father does. I think what he does differently is that whereas Francois has always been very much focused on his two properties, Louis is actually also a winemaking consultant. He does work with various other properties, including in the south of France. And so in that sense, I guess he has to be quite open to winemaking innovation and what else is going on in the world of wine. Whereas Francois is very focused, I think it's fair to say, on his two properties. So yeah, in that sense, I don't feel that Louis is looking to push the boundary beyond. I mean, you know, Francois is already pretty experimental. I mean, one thing that Francois does at Tertre-Haute, for example, is he warms the cellar, which is unheard of in Bordeaux, really. So he actually has kind of radiators on the walls of his cellar, and the cellar itself is underground, or partially underground. And, you know, it's fairly warm going down there, whereas Louis' winemaking style is a bit more classical than that. I mean, he has control in his cellars, and he has glycol systems for maintaining a certain temperature when he's fermenting. So I think Louis is probably a little bit more open to winemaking innovation in a modern sense, where Francois has very much gone off on his own route.
When the vine will be older, the wine will get better. Is there a correlation between the two?
That's an interesting one. I mean, I think young wines are capable of producing incredibly good wine, and that there is something to be said for this kind of youthful exuberance. I mean, you can't make wine for the first 3 years of a vine's life, but after that, you hear of vines which are 5 years old producing stunningly good wines. So certainly that is possible. The received wisdom is that, yes, the older the vine, the lower the yields, and the more densely concentrated the fruit, and therefore the more complex the wine. And I guess in general terms, that is the case. But don't underestimate the importance of having this kind of youthful vibrance in a wine as well. It's quite hard to say that there's a linear relationship between the older the vine, the better the wine.
Mark, you mentioned the Chardonnay is made in Puligny style. So can you tell us a bit more about the style and what's special about this particular region?
Yeah, so I mean, 2 of the plots come from Puligny, so in all but name it is Puligny fruit. It comes from old vines and low production. And it's that very discrete blend of fruit and minerality and sort of low use of oak and acidity that are the sort of hallmarks of a very good Puligny's.
Francois' first vintage was in 2010, and It's been 10 years now. And how do you think it has changed and evolved in the last 10 years?
Well, prior to the split of the estate, Francois' role was very much that of the vineyard manager overseeing the vineyard, whereas his brother Jack was in charge of the vinification. So I think over the past 10 years, Francois has had to learn and develop this new skill set. I think certainly in the past couple of years, the culmination of this, we're starting to see a more honed and balanced style of winemaking, which is very exciting. So yeah, hopefully the next so many years, I mean, certainly in the last couple of years, this is 2017, we've obviously been tasting the last 2 beautiful wines, and that's across the range as well. He also does a red, so but yeah, he's really starting to perfect his craft in the last couple of years or so, and it shows, certainly in this wine.
Shall I just say a little bit about the other 2 wines in the case? We have the Eradus Sauvignon Blanc 2019 from Michael Eradus from the Our Tree Valley, £13.95 per bottle, and a great expression of high quality South Island Sauvignon Blanc. Again, in the theme of classics, that style of Sauvignon Blanc, which is not so much pyrazine and sort of herbaceousness driven, but actually something much more interesting than that. That has become a classic, and so that's very much worth discovering. The other wine is the Belezos Reserva Rioja from Zugober, which is a boutique producer in Rioja Alavesa. Again, a real nailed-on classic, a sort of traditional Reserva Rioja. The price point on that is £17.95. So those are the other 2 wines in the case. I think we still have availability. So if you haven't yet bought the case, please do.